It's recording, right?
Sure. Is there like a notification? Okay, we got the notification. Cool.
So sorry, we just quickly got a question regarding the recording. We will be putting all of our breakout sessions are recorded today, including our keynote and student panel. They would all be on our YouTube page, and you can find that link if you just go to UTD SCC. If you just go to our website, you'll be able to find a link to our YouTube page. Great question.
And then just to repeat the question, since we weren't recording at that point, the question was, what has it been like to share the experience of the pandemic with clients and students, and how do we avoid taking work home? Which is a really good question. So if you don't know, throughout this entire year and then a good half of last year, but throughout our entire internship experience, the Student Counseling Center has been operating remotely. So we're doing all of our services virtually via Microsoft Teams. And that is the way that Johnny and Catherine and I will be finishing out our internship. So we'll have done a full year of a remote virtual internship. And it has been interesting, to say the least. I think that there's good and bad aspects of it. I definitely miss being able to just like share physical space with students and be in like a face-to-face setting. I think that there's something really connecting about that. And I just miss being able to be in the office together. But at the same time, I've also found that this format, that telehealth, affords a certain type of intimacy that our face-to-face therapy didn't in some ways, because each of us are going to be in our homes. We're in our own personal spaces, and there's something that is kind of like connecting and cool about that. And then you're also sometimes navigating just like human moments together. Sometimes pets will make an appearance, or sometimes there will be just like interesting, funny things that will happen since we're doing this all in our homes. And those moments have been some of my favorite. They've been really connecting because those are things that just wouldn't happen if we were in the office together. And then in addition to that, the pandemic has been such a shared experience for all of us. I mean, it certainly has impacted people disproportionately based on identity, but all of us in some way can relate to the experience of like grief, for example, that has come with the pandemic. Like all of us have missed out on some experiences throughout this year in the pandemic. And it's been, again, really connecting to be able to step into that and sit with that with clients and students. So that's been unique. In terms of how we avoid taking work home, I just have to consistently remind myself that, you know, the students that I see are best served if I take care of myself as well. I hold myself accountable for not taking work home. So even though it would be very easy to jump on my laptop and do some more work, paperwork and things like that, I really try to remind myself that if I'm exhausting myself, if I'm not taking breaks, then I'm not going to be as helpful as I could to my clients. So that's one way that I try to keep myself accountable.
Thank you for like bringing that up, Alexandra. Like I think something that's been sort of, you know, a lot of times when we like sit with our clients, you know, they can feel very alone in their experience and they're not even sometimes sure if we can truly understand, but sort of going together with this, you know, pandemic, that we've been sort of empathizing on another level of the missed experiences and of the grief and the lack of coping, you know, that you're kind of talking about. So just even being able to kind of being able to say like your therapist is also trying to take care of themselves, and like self-care during this moment is so important, you know. So if you're able to kind of care for yourself, then you can sort of extend that out to other people, and that can be such an important message, especially during this time. Any reflections on that, Catherine, Johnny, on your end?
Something I'd add on, I think definitely agree with Alexandra, as the shared experience of the pandemic has a connecting thing and like lends to a level of empathy, another layer that's not always there. Where I think it's been challenging, so, you know, as far as self-care goes, boundary setting is one thing that Alexandra described that's really important. But also I think there's those days where, you know, if I'm feeling the pandemic more, if I'm feeling especially frustrated or down with it that day, and then I talk to clients who are having the same thing, I think at the end of the day, I have to take a moment and like parse out which of the sadness I'm holding is mine and which of it is something that was my client's, and let that go for the day, because I held it when I was with them and that was what I could do for them. And so keeping it with me past that point isn't serving them or serving me. So that can be really abstract, odd internal work to do, but I think it's really crucial when you're in a field that requires your empathy as a part of a tool of the job.
Yeah, that's such a great reflection in terms of like you're kind of constantly kind of needing to sort of step back and look and reflect, like what is my stuff, what is other stuff, and then kind of learning how to kind of seek support even when you need it, right? Because we are all kind of in the same kind of trauma and grief. So yeah, I mean that's an important reflection you have. Thank you, John.
Yeah, definitely just echo, what John and Alexandra shared, and yeah, it's definitely just been one of those things where I've appreciated just having that connection where, students have been transparent. It's like, it's hard to do work. It's hard to like feel motivated. It's hard. It's like, yes, 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 yes. And just really like normalizing like how this has really been like such an impact in everybody's lives. And I know, yeah, people are feeling it in different ways, with a lot of just different things that have been going on in this last year. But certainly, yeah, in a weird way, feeling that connection and again, in a weird way, glad that there's like some relatability in that. But yeah, just definitely normalizing, all of that we're all carrying and holding.
It's this sense of community there, of going through this shared traumatic experience. Alexandra, I know you touched upon it, and this is a question that I get from students quite often, and they ask, so tell me, how is telehealth different from being like an in-person therapy experience? I'm curious to hear, because you all have done both now, and have been doing teletherapy for a while. How would you describe it for our students?
I can take this one or two. I don't know if Alexandra, if this was directly to her, but I'll say for me personally, it's been interesting to say the least. I think since we are like in this position of training and like just learning, what this is like to do, virtual counseling, I'll say this has been my first experience doing virtual counseling. And so it was, yeah, learning just ethical considerations. We try to check in with, students' locations, making sure at least, they're in Texas, things like that. So that's just been part of, in some ways, like the training process. But I'll say I'm glad that it's in some ways been more accessible for students, looking for mental health services. When there can be difficulties, trying to even have access to transportation to get, maybe to a counseling center or, seeking other, mental health resources, it's not always available. And certainly too, not to mention cost and insurance, things like that. So I'm glad that this has been just another way that we can provide, students some mental health services. Yeah, and then, fun times with technology, and that's been, kind of, I think the running theme here is connectivity issues, the glitches, things like that. So I know, at least for me, that's always been, just something to be transparent with students about, and have, just appreciated again, their flexibility with, if we have to reschedule or if we, just kind of are frozen there in time, just, give it a moment, it'll come back again. Or if I have to repeat a question, like, let me know. Yeah. So curious for others too, how y'all have been experiencing it.
I mean, what comes to mind to me are some of the things I already shared about, like, there's just something really connecting about being able to be in each of your personal spaces, and that's been really cool, a cool part of telehealth. I
when we were thrust into the pandemic and everybody had to quickly find ways to provide telehealth services, I hadn't had previous experience before that point with telehealth. And I was worried, like, is it going to feel the same? Like, am I going to feel like I'm building relationships with my clients in the same way that I was before? And I have, from my experience, I was very relieved to find out that absolutely, I am still building meaningful connections with clients in the telehealth format. And that's been quite a relief and really an important part of the work that we've been doing throughout this year. And then in addition to that, yes, there's been technology issues to navigate, which I have not loved, but that's part of the territory. And then I, for one, my co-therapist is a small, excited dog who sometimes has a lot to say in sessions. And that's always been, you know, a little bit of a challenge to navigate, but it's all part of the process.
Yeah, and I'll add on. I mean, I think that there's just these trade-offs. I think Alexandra has mentioned the pieces that have been more connecting in some ways, as far as knowing someone is in a space where they feel really comfortable. It's their home, it's their bedroom. You know, seeing, you know, we can have a conversation about that poster on the wall, or their cat that walked by or whatever, and that's a fun thing. And more, you know, more informal and connecting in that way. And aside from that too, there's this benefit of, like, my client's face is like zoomed in on the screen, right? So even more so, I get a sense of your emotion as it's coming through your facial expressions. But then what the trade-offs are, the things I miss out on, are like the rest of your body language, because it's all just like shoulders up, you know, and like the vibe of the therapy space and how I would want to set it up and that kind of stuff. You miss out on that. So, you know, I think overall I still probably prefer in person, but I still feel very connected to my clients and like I can do effective work through this medium. I think I just saw a hand raised from Divya. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Accident.
Oh, okay. No worries at all. Yeah, like I think it just we feel like really so grateful that you all have sort of touched upon, and that's been kind of my experience too doing this, is the technology issue for sure. You know, at first we were like, oh, you know, like in the room, somebody wouldn't just suddenly disappear, and then, you know, there could be this, you know, and you don't know how long it's going to take for you to get back on, and then it can kind of really break the chain of your thought, or, you know, where you are with emotions, you know, you're really connecting, and that can feel a little bit like disconnecting in the moment. And we all have sort of learned how to navigate it, apologize, and then kind of go back to it. And also in some ways to just even prepare ourselves. I think what this year has taught me is to just hold tons of compassion for each other and even ourselves, because I think a lot of times we don't do a good job of holding compassion for ourselves, in terms of we're sharing spaces with our pets, other humans, there could be somebody at the door, or you might have roommates. So all of that is part of it, and interruptions are all okay. We are trying to do our best navigating this in a strange way, you know, so that's been really nice. And I think, Asmin, like what you talked about, I think a lot of times we don't get to communicate that with students, is that there's some logistical things with being remote, which is like our licensure. So, you know, if a student sort of moves out of state, there's some limitations we have around practicing. So even like education around what it means for us to, you know, be able to provide services through telehealth. But I think I'm with you and Alexandra. I think it surprised me how much similar it can feel to like an in-person contact. Like that really surprised me too, because I was like, oh, I'm not so sure about this, you know, telehealth thing. I'm just gonna miss out on so much, and you can really sort of, you know, feel very connected to someone even through a screen, and, you know, can have pretty productive sessions. So thank you for all of your reflections. I'm curious to hear. Just thinking about like ways in which do you see role of mental health workers in our society in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. There was a mentor I had early on in graduate school who said that medical health providers save lives and mental health providers make lives worth living. And that's stuck with me since then. And to me, I think that's a lot of what we'll be doing. For the last year, so much of the focus has purely been survival. How do I avoid catching this virus? How do I adapt to this home environment and be okay? How do I protect my children? Some of these really intense core survival kinds of questions. And so now I think as folks are coming out of it and they find that they've been dealing with depression or anxiety, I think a lot of folks, let me back this up a little bit. I think there's going to be ways in which this pandemic will serve to speed up a little bit of the reduction in mental health stigma, because there's just so many people right now who have no choice but to notice, I don't feel the same. I don't feel as good as I used to, and I don't know how to get back to that point. It's hard for me to get out of bed, or I'm constantly worrying about stuff, and I know it's not logical, but I can't make it stop, and my energy is being drained that way, or other mental health challenges besides depression and anxiety. So I think we have that role of trying to continue to grease those wheels of reducing the stigma and validating people. Yes, those mental health concerns are very, very real. We can help you. And then I think also, and I've had a number of clients mention, feeling strange socially, like not feeling very comfortable meeting new people, not having lost some of those rhythms of talking to a new person and wanting to spend time with them. But it's like, it's sad because I've talked to so many clients who I think would love to know one another, right? Because they want connection, but don't know how to, and that affords those connections. So I think that's another role to play as well, is helping people to work with us to kind of practice and relearn those skills and talk about interpersonal connection and talk about the importance of vulnerability and loving one another. So yeah, those are a couple of the biggest things that I see as far as what the role that we'll be serving as vaccinations increase and we start to step back into something closer to life as we knew it before.
Yeah, there certainly seems like, as it was an adjustment into the pandemic world, there is going to be a readjustment back to whatever it's going to look like, because I think it's going to look different, and whatever next normal is going to be, it's going to be different, and the role we would play as mental health professionals in that. I'm also wondering about if we'll see some new syndromes or some new concerns that would come up as we reintegrate back into society. Any other reflections, Catherine, on your end, Alexandra?
Just speaking to something that you mentioned earlier, Pachi, about one of the big takeaways from the pandemic, for me and for many of us, has been self-compassion. Many of us have had to contend with, we're doing the best that we can. None of us asked to be in this situation. It's created challenges that we could never have anticipated, and nor should we have had to. And many of us are still working on that. Self-compassion can be really tough to learn and to practice and incorporate into our everyday lives. But I hope for those of us that have started on that journey towards self-compassion, I really hope that that's something that we can continue afterwards, because self-compassion is not just needed in crisis situations, in a global pandemic. We can really all be kinder to ourselves throughout our lives. And I hope that that's something that we can continue after this. And I think, mental health professionals can be a key component in helping to teach those skills to people.
Yeah, that's a valuable reflection through this process of going through all of this trauma. A question that came through chat. Do you all struggle with imposter syndrome as graduate students / interns in the field? If so, how do you deal with it?
Yes, I'll be the first to say yes, of course. Of course, we struggle with imposter syndrome. As I don't know any graduate students who have not contended with imposter syndrome throughout grad school, because there's many phases of graduate school, especially in the field of psychology. You are learning to be a therapist. You are often conducting research at the same time. You're learning about theories. You have to do a lot of deep personal reflection about who you are and your worldview and how that impacts your work. This is a lot for anybody to do at one point in time, all while you're often having to do internships and practicums, or teaching or working, and also taking a full course load. It's enough to make anybody unsure of themselves. So yes, it is definitely something that I personally have experienced. I think for me, it's gotten easier throughout graduate school and like the further I've gotten into my training, because you just get used to being into the role and you settle into your identity as a therapist, and you get better at identifying what I'm really good at and what my style of therapy looks like, and you start to really embrace that and feel good about it. There will be times where it gets triggered and it gets brought up for you again, but I always find it helpful to look back, like, you know, there have been times where this feeling's come up for me before and I got through it. It didn't last forever. It's unlikely to last forever now as well. And that always helps me. No feelings are forever.
And I'll add, yes, for me personally, yes, the struggle is real. And man, I think just like you're saying, Alexandra, it's like, yeah, we're juggling a lot on our plates as interns and still also graduate students, you know, getting things situated in our home programs, you know, still working, you know, 8 to 5 here and things like that. And yeah, it's hard. and all while wondering, like, am I doing this right? Am I really being helpful? You know, are the things that we're talking about in sessions with clients, you know, I hope this is, you know, just landing the right way and not being offensive in any way. And I'll say, like, to, you know, how to deal with it. I don't know that there's any one right way. I don't think we can say that. You know, everyone's going to kind of deal with it in their own way. But for me personally, you know, it's been really, really helpful to have, you know, certainly you all to kind of go and joke with. And, you know, I'll even, if I may, you know, kind of even share a little insight joke of, you know, sometimes it'd be like that, you know, having Alexandra start that quote off. And so it's again, just for me, been really helpful to have, you know, those friends to kind of go to, laugh, cry, like, you know, just vent, you know, have that connection. And so I definitely appreciate having you all to, yeah, just kind of share in that feeling, you know, and you know, just also just have that support, you know, for when we are feeling kind of down and gloomy, like, no, it'll be okay, you know, we still got this. Even like right before this, you know, we were like, oh gosh, it's our turn to talk, but no, we got this, we're the interns, we can do this. So yeah.
Yeah, strongly agree with everything that Catherine and Alexandra have said. I think imposter syndrome is just a big part of it. I also agree with kind of the notion Alexandra described of, like, it slowly decreases over time. Like, as you build your skill set and you see yourself doing stuff and your supervisors are like, you're doing great. And you're like, okay, I'm going to choose to believe you, you know. For me, as far as like how to deal with it, I think it's been a couple things. I mean, definitely what just Catherine talked about of, you know, venting with other folks in grad school and friends, and, you know, just connecting over imposter syndrome in general. And then also, I think for me, it's about specific skills, right? You build a skill set and then you go try couples therapy the first time. You're like, well, I thought I knew I would know how to do that, but apparently I don't. You talk to someone else, like, oh my gosh, I was also really daunted by couples therapy the first time, and you're able to talk that through, and it's really normalizing. You feel less alone. I had another mentor earlier on encourage me to try to hold always both confidence in the skills and the things that I know how to do, and the knowledge that I have, and humility of the things that I don't know yet and I can learn. And like, either one without the other is a problem. Only confidence, now you're arrogant and you won't listen to feedback of the ways you can get better. But if it's only humility, you think you're terrible, that's the imposter syndrome place, and you can't like reflect and appreciate the things that you are doing well and the services that you are providing to your clients. So I don't always do that well, depends on the day, but I try to hold those two at the same time. And then last thing, I've given like talks on this at the counseling center, keeping a growth mindset, reminding yourself that you are supposed to make mistakes. That's the reason grad school is there in the first place. They throw us into the fire as far as like teaching or doing counseling with the expectation that you will have some mistakes or do some things not as well. And then you go back, you process it, you figure out, you learn it, you go back, you try it again. And that's totally fine. And it's cool. And so knowing that you have the space to make mistakes helps you breathe easier and go in and just take a crack at it.
I mean, so many like nuggets of like, you know, knowledge in there. Just like, even like I'm hearing like all of you have had to kind of find a sense of community with your other students, and like all you just shook your heads and yes, yes, we've struggled with imposter syndrome. Um, and I think something that sort of like really resonated with me is that that it will come and go, right? There'll be moments when you feel like a sense of mastery and you're like, okay, I think I got this. But then be moments then you'll be sort of right back to, and just for me, like being South Asian, you know, there was not a lot of other students who were like similar, holding similar identities. So there was like, there's another sense of this. Did somebody make a mistake at the admissions and I'm here because somebody just didn't, you know, look at things properly. So that it's absolutely normal to kind of feel that way. But as you kind of go through the program, the sense of like mastery and community comes in and you feel a little bit better about it. Sometimes you just kind of have to fake it. You have to fake it till you make it. You have to pretend like you know what you're doing, and you know sometimes you actually then know how to do things. But that's a great question. The second question that that came through chat is, what made y'all choose to go into this field?
It's complicated. There's lots of reasons. For my whole life, I wanted to be a lawyer. My plan was to go to law school, and that's all I ever saw myself doing. I took advice from a family friend who was a lawyer to take a lot of psychology courses because it would help me in my work as a lawyer. So I was like, cool. When I got to college, I will take some psychology classes, and that makes sense to me. And then slowly over time, I realized how much like passion and joy I felt in those classes, and kept adding more and more and more. I thought, well, I'll minor in psychology. And then I was like, well, I guess I'll just double major in it since I'm doing all of these. And then eventually I was like, oh, okay, there's a problem here. Like, this is clearly where my heart and my passion lies. So then I decided to commit to pursuing psychology graduate school in the last semester of my senior year. So I had to take an additional semester to make sure that I could apply for graduate school in psychology. And I do not regret it. It's the best decision I've ever made. I think the field is just a really good fit for me because I think many of us are attracted to the field if we're helpers, if we feel drawn to help people in our lives. And that certainly was the case for me. And in taking psychology courses in undergrad, I really loved the feeling of finding answers to things. Like, many of us are struggling with mental health issues or problems in our relationships or whatever it might be in our personal lives. And psychology helped me figure out what might be going on here. And being able to provide people with some of those answers can help take some of the shame and the blame away from what they're dealing with. And that's probably one of the most significant pieces that oh, I could do this for a lifetime. Like, this feels really special to me. This feels important. I think this might be my calling. So that is a long story of how I ended up here.
Thank you for sharing your story, Alexandra. Catherine, John.
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I think very much in connection with Alexandra. I mean, I knew from a pretty young age that I wanted to be in a helping profession, and that's where I would, get meaning and satisfaction. And then again, I think a really common refrain as far as as well as being helpers, folks who go into do therapy are the friends that their friends talk to, right? Like the people that they often. Their friends feel comfortable coming to them and being vulnerable, and they feel safe and trusted and comfortable with them. And so I noticed that, and I just found humans, and like the gray and complexity of psychology all really interesting. And then I think what cemented it once I got to college and majored in psychology, it was a combination of the classes being really interesting, being really excited about it, going to therapy myself, which I recommend a lot. If you're ever considering going in this field, go receive therapy and think to yourself, what I want to be on the other side of this conversation. Also, you'll be a better therapist if you've been a client as well. And then some of my favorite parts of college and life in general are late night vulnerable conversations with people and that's when I feel really connected to them and feel very alive, honestly. So the idea of getting to do that as a day job is awesome. So That's a nutshell for me.
Thank you, Johnny. Catherine.
Yeah. Trying to think like where to start. Yeah, it was a little different for me, I'll be honest. I think from a young age, I'll say from a young age, I did always have an interest in psychology. You know, I just was really, really fascinated that like the mind can work in so many different ways, and that there could actually be people to like, you know, have conversations with and help people, you know, with things that they're struggling with. So that interest was there for me from a young age. But I will say, just personally in my life, I had a lot of like family expectations that I had to meet, or I felt like I had to meet growing up. I mean, come from a Hispanic family, and so there was a big emphasis on, you know, trying to go into a professional field, but more so like a medical or a dental field. That was kind of what the messages I was receiving in terms of like, you know, what's acceptable, or like what's going to determine your success later in life. And so that was kind of my trajectory for you know, high school, taking, you know, science classes. Into college, my major was biology. So yeah, lots of late nights with all of that, biochem, OChems, goodness. But I digress. So it wasn't really until after like college, you know, my plan for being a biology major and everything was to go into the dental field. And you know, I was studying, taking the, you know, trying to get ready to take those entrance exams for dental school, and really just having, you know, that kind of come to terms moment with myself, like, this isn't what I want to do with my life. Like, you know, I don't feel like, you know, this is my calling. And knowing though that I wanted to still help people in some way, and you know, just kind of being remembered of that desire from, you know, when I was young, that, you know, I can still help people, you know, in this mental health field. And you know, was fortunate enough to be able to pursue, you know, pursue this kind of field, and take classes, learn, you know, from, I hadn't, you know, taken any psychology classes in my undergrad. So, you know, kind of had to start from the basics, and, you know, learn that way. Again, kind of similarly, like make sure I was meeting the criteria to, you know, apply to grad schools, you know, things like that. And I've been really fortunate that it's lined up in that way, you know, to be where I'm at now. But yeah, that's kind of been my route. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your journeys, Catherine, Alexandra, Johnny. A sort of related question: how do you see your identity and ways in which it shaped your professional journey and your aspirations?
I can start us off. So yeah, like I shared, I come from a Hispanic family, and so in some ways that was the message that I was getting, was that like I needed to represent, you know, and certainly I didn't see, you know, Hispanic or women, you know, being represented a lot growing up in kind of like a professional setting. And so I knew from an early age that was, you know, what I wanted to be able to, you know, share with others, and help, you know, show others that, you know, as again, a Hispanic woman, you know, we are here, we can, you know, be in these roles and be successful, and you know, and so that also was very, very important for me, you know, growing up. And so I wanted to, you know, make sure that you know, whatever my professional journey was, especially from a young age, you know, that was something that I could make sure to aspire to, and you know, help, you know, my community, my Hispanic, you know, community especially. But you know, really then being able to see the ways in which, you know, I can help be a voice, and also help like bolster up, you know, our clients' voices, you know, for especially, you know, all the people that we work with that are, you know, have marginalized identities. It's really been, great to have conversations of, how to empower ourselves and really advocate for our own needs, kind of given all the things that we're all going through. So, yeah, I definitely think that, my identities have been able to just, kind of be that reminder for myself and, just continuing to hope that as I, kind of graduate and then, start working, like it's just something that I'll be able to continue to do in my work is like just provide, more accessible, equitable services for folks so that, we're really being able to help as many people as possible without there being, all these like red tapes of like, oh, what about insurance and this and that? It's like, no, like let's break that down. Like let's really look at providing, services for everyone who, really do need them.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I mean, I think kind of having known you for almost a year now, like I can see like your passion for empowerment and supporting the community really comes across in everything that you do. So I see like ways in which you show up in spaces, even like how much that's part of who you are. So appreciate that reflection. For you, Johnny and Alexandra.
I think for me, I'm a person who holds a lot of privileged identities, being a white woman from a middle class family. I'm cisgender, so I hold a lot of privileges in the identities that I have. And that has impacted the course of training that I've chosen in a lot of ways. So following my bachelor's degree, I worked for about a year at what was essentially a homeless shelter for teens who would come stay at the center and then learn life skills that they needed to be independent and live on their own at that point. So things like how to apply for jobs, how to get health insurance, stuff like that. And as you may or may not know, homeless youth are disproportionately BIPOC individuals, they're disproportionately LGBTQ individuals. So a lot of the clients that I was working with at that job held marginalized identities. And that was one of the first experiences that I had working so closely with individuals who had vastly different experiences from me in their lifetime. And I got to know the many ways in which their experiences of racism or homophobia or just various types of discrimination impacted so many areas of their life. And it was at that time that I developed a real passion for advocacy. So being able to advocate for my clients at the homeless shelter, that passion has stayed with me throughout my training. I decided to pursue a doctorate in counseling psychology because the field of counseling psychology has a pretty explicit emphasis in general on looking at contextual factors for clients. So looking at identity variables and somebody's experiences and how they're impacting the issues that bring them to therapy. And I specifically chose a program that has an emphasis on feminist multicultural training because I wanted to get more training in how to work with clients with different identities than me. So that is a long way of saying my passion for this work has really started pretty early on. And some of the experiences that I've had have really made an impact in the decisions I've made in terms of training.
Yeah, it's a great question. I also hold many privileged identities, cis, hetero, white man, able-bodied. And so, I mean, when I think about the question of how has it impacted my journey, I have to first imagine that me getting to a point where I was accepted to a spot in a graduate program that are very competitive spots, I'm sure was influenced by the fact that I have all those identities. My name is John Adams. That's like the most English, that name is on the Constitution. Okay, not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So I'm sure that put me in positions of privilege and people being there for me and having mentors and getting a lot of support and advantages that a lot of folks didn't. And then when I got into a counseling program, I don't know if I was totally aware of how counseling programs over clinical programs had more of a diversity emphasis. And I learned a lot of really important, incredible stuff about my unprivileged identities, about racism, sexism, sizeism, things I'd barely learned anything about or even heard of before. And so that, as Alexandra described, I also kind of then gained a passion for those things and kind of an ongoing journey to figure out where I can use my voice in the way that it's paid attention to speak to those things and to empower and then step out of the way and let people speak to these things in ways that I can't. So I think in particular I have a passion for men's issues because it's interesting because in the one hand, especially in research and PhD levels, there's been a lot of men historically in psychology, but as far as doing therapy and doing clinical work, it's often been more women doing that work. And so I think being a man that both personally and then as a therapist has learned to be more fluent in emotion and aware of emotion, and then to try to help other men do that as part of help other men to learn how to regulate and acknowledge and validate, take care of their own emotions. That's something I care about a lot to help those men and also to help the people that could be harmed by those men if those men aren't able to work through those issues. So yeah, that's a quick rundown of my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing your journeys. And I think it just kind of speaks to how much like our training is so important. And all these years we spend in graduate school, we may come with some level of awareness, but then, through our practicums and clinical experiences, we come to sort of a different understanding of ourselves and where like some of our passion lies in terms of this work. We had a question in the chat. I know applying to graduate school can be super stressful. How do you all have, do you all have any tips or things you learned during that process that you wish you had known?
That's a really good question. Yes, it is super stressful. There's probably not a way to make it not stressful, just inherently stressful because you're trying to work towards a big goal, and it can be scary because those spots are competitive. So you just want to do everything you can to put yourself in the best position to achieve what you're hoping for. I think organization can be really helpful. Like a lot of people recommend, there's a lot of privileges in this recommendation, but a lot of people recommend that you apply to like 10 different graduate programs. Again, because the spots are so competitive, you want to like maximize your chances of getting in somewhere. However, applying to grad school is expensive and not everybody can afford that. So do what works for you by all means. But if you are applying to multiple programs, try to hold some kind of spreadsheet to keep track of everything that you need, because all programs will ask for different things in terms of like different numbers of letters of recommendation or different essays, or maybe sometimes they want a resume and sometimes they don't. There's lots of things that can be pretty confusing. So having a space to track all that can be really helpful. What else? Try not to take it personally if you're not getting offers for interviews or acceptances or anything like that. These spots are so competitive. My doctoral program, my cohort, so the people that were accepted with me, there's only 7. Some can be smaller than that at times. It is just a matter of there are not enough spots for everybody, and it doesn't have to mean anything about you or your competence or your skills or how you would be as a psychologist or counselor or whatever it is that you're applying for. It just comes down to like luck sometimes and numbers, honestly, because the ways in which we evaluate people, there's not like a scientific quantitative rather way to do that. And it can be really hard to take it personally, but just do your best to try to detach yourself from that. And that's probably my best advice. Oh, also really quick, there's no shame in not getting in anywhere. The very first time that I applied to graduate school, I applied to 10 programs and did not get in anywhere. So I had to spend some time getting research experience, getting some clinical experience, and then apply again. And then I was much more successful. So there's absolutely no shame if your first shot doesn't end up anywhere.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of that, I think there's no shame too or I would hope that there would be no shame too, and also just having kind of like a backup plan. If in applying to grad school or to the different programs, if that doesn't pan out, there's no shame in having to go a different route. I think for some folks, it's helpful to, they just kind of run in that, degree of like trying to over prepare and like do all these things. And sometimes when then all of that preparing, again, like just doesn't pan out, then, many times they're left like, well, now what do I do? How am I going to make it, And that's not to say like, don't give up, or, this is something that you really want to pursue, like, go for it, do it. Just like Alexandra said, it might not work out that first time, but it wouldn't also, I think, hurt just to have something, in the works or in the back that that, this would still be something of interest to you, if these kind of, applications just didn't, like kind of go the way that you're hoping for. So.
Yeah, some things that add on. I mean, I think one thing that can be conflicting is, you see these programs and things that require and that kind of stuff, or maybe you get an interview somewhere and you show up and like, that you're not a great fit for one reason or another. Maybe like the thing that the advisor you're lined up with to possibly work with, you're not actually that interested in, but you said you were. Essentially, know to what extent you're willing to play the game and what compromises you can make, but then to what extent would something be too far or like wouldn't be worth your while? Because I understand people, I think, can put themselves in situations that they're actually going to be miserable just for the sake of going after the PhD, right? But it's a long road. It's, it can be 5 to 7 years. And if you're not excited about or have a decent amount of fit with the person you're going to work with, the thing you're going to do, it'd be amazing to get that PhD, but if you're miserable the whole time, will you make it? Or when you make it through, would it be worth it? So I can remember like applying to someone's lab in Houston who was like very developmentally focused. And the more they described their research, the more I was like, man, yeah, this would be a cool program to work in general, but that probably just wouldn't be a good spot for me. Things I did that would serve you well, that served me well, and that I would encourage. There's like a big book called like the application of it's like a green book. It's like clinical and counseling psychology programs, and it gives you a breakdown of every program based on how research and clinic heavy they are. And it has a lot of super helpful information. Walking through that and picking out your favorites and then narrowing down that list further is really helpful. Also, like Alexandra said, kind of adding on to the, if you apply once and don't get in, like applying again. I mean, applying again looks good. That shows like a stick-to-itiveness. Multiple times in my program, I saw applicants, like interviewees from the past year, come back and interview a second time, and oftentimes get in on that second interview. On top of that, if you are about to get to the end of undergrad and you're just burnt out and tired and don't have it yet, there's no penalty to waiting a while. I've seen graduate students who come straight out of undergrad and are 22 when they start, and I've seen graduate students who are 35 and who have had 1 or 2 careers prior to deciding to do this, and they still get in. So, please take the time you need for yourself if you need time off. But then also, if you know that momentum is going to be good for you and you should go straight away, then do it. So just figure out what fits best for you in that sense.
Really valuable, suggestions and advice in there. Another question we got, and we just being mindful. I know we have scheduled time till 2:30 to be together. So perhaps we could take this question, maybe one more after this. How do you get clinical experience prior to grad school?
It's a good question. It's tough because, I mean, it's not like you can be a therapist. You have to have like a master's degree at least and a license in order to do that. So there's not an unlimited amount of opportunities, but there are some things you can do. Popular ones include volunteering for like crisis helplines. There's lots of different like services that offer something like that. So you could get experience that way. Additionally, the position that I got working at the homeless shelter with youth. So I'm not doing therapy, but I am working with people. I'm teaching them life skills, and there are some parallels to what therapy like looks like. So that was really helpful in my application process. I had another one, but it's escaped me. What do y'all think, Johnny and Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're on the money as far as like you have to find things that are like clinical adjacent. So I mean, like I think there's usually a lot of opportunities for working with youth, especially if you're like a college student. So volunteer opportunities to work at like camps for kids with different physical disabilities or mental health disabilities. There's also some jobs, like I had a paid job working with kids in the summer with behavioral difficulties. You may not love working with the population that there are opportunities available for you for getting clinical experience, and that is an area where I'd say, you know, go ahead and do the uncomfortable thing, because it's, you know, for getting clinical experience, you just gotta take what's there. So same with like research experience. If you have an opportunity to get in the lab and it's like not your favorite kind of psychology, you still need the lab experience. So go do it. You know, you'll make it through. You come out with a skill set and you can put that on your CV.
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much more to add. Oh, sorry, Alexander, go for it if you have more.
I just remember there was another thing that a lot of my friends ended up doing. I'm sure there's a better name for it, but at the time they called it patient sitting at like behavioral health or mental health facilities, like hospitals or things like that. They either volunteered or paid just to spend time with people who are there, just to give them some like extra connection and company. I had a lot of friends who do that, and there's not like prior experience or anything that you would need to do something like that. So that was just another one that I had thought of.
I think there are probably some volunteer opportunities at correctional facilities as well. And that's another pretty big, important population for clinical work. So if you can find like a nonprofit or a place that provides some kind of volunteer opportunity for supporting folks who are in jail or in prison, you know, that's really invaluable experience as well.
Yeah, and if you all spoke to this, I don't mean to repeat it, but yeah, just maybe like getting connected too with like different organizations in college during your undergrad, speaking to professors, you know, really kind of getting to hear what they might recommend too, you know, in terms of like maybe, yeah, just getting different experience, different research, or being involved in just different projects. I think just really being transparent with them, you know, can be really helpful in open some doors for just different opportunities.
And I would add to that, I don't know if you all know, but we like have peer advocates on campus. So that's another opportunity. They do a lot of mental health outreach. And I think it's really challenging at an undergrad level to be able to get clinical opportunities, because they don't really want you to be sitting with a patient without proper training and taking some classes. But you could also, I've heard, so I worked at career services, which is not quite mental health counseling, but I did career counseling. So that was a great experience, and it was wonderful to be able to put that on my resume. So you might, like Alexandra said, it might be something that's adjacent to what counseling would look like. You might be able to get opportunities. Absolutely call clinics, find out if, you know, there's any way you can kind of get in, because there might be some research that might be happening where you could do interviews with patients. So you could do like a behavioral interview. So a lot of times those jobs are available, and they could be paid opportunities. So there are some opportunities or ways in which you can get some experience in a mental health setting. A lot of times when you apply to graduate school, there isn't an explicit requirement of having had clinical experience. So just know that like folks are not sort of expecting you to come in with this already a wealth of experience. They know that, you know, unless you have a graduate level degree, it's very hard to find opportunities unless it's sort of built into your program. So I know that there's some flexibility around that. So we might have just space for one more question, if anybody would like to ask one. Going once, going twice. Oh, I see somebody typing, so we'll wait. Feel free to unmute yourself too if you'd like to ask a question. Oh, okay. Johnny just shared in the chat on clinical experience. You can also try to work at the front desk of clinics. You can get some client contact, and even if it's just checking in with people or checking them in. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Any last thoughts from our panel about your experience being asked questions, or any last sort of wrap-up thoughts before we close out?
Well, I enjoyed being here today. Thank you for the questions. They were great questions. We all know how much applying and doing all of these things is challenging. And again, we are helpers ourselves. So we love to try to help people make the process less painful. So feel free to reach out to us and honestly other mental health professionals if you ever need mentorship or questions or support around this stuff, because we're all just trying to help everybody else in their journeys to try to help the world, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely just echo that. Thank you all so much for y'all's, participation today, and just really appreciated all the questions, and hoping again that it's helpful. And yeah, reach out, please. We have a lot of resources on our website, so please check them out. And also we're on the social medias, to plug that too. So yeah, get connected.
Yes, thank you all. Check out our social media pages. And if you are planning to apply to graduate school, best of luck. And even if you're not, just good luck with the things that you choose to pursue.
Well, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. Thank you so much for our panelists, Johnny, Catherine, Alexandra. It is such a pleasure to work alongside you. And thank you for giving us such helpful insight into your journey as, being a doctoral student, being a therapist, and navigating all of this throughout the pandemic. So we really appreciate you all sharing your thoughts. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.